Hi, everybody. I'm Wendy Murdoch, and this is Webinars with Wendy. We have been doing this now since 2020. So we are entering in March into our 4th year of doing Webinars with Wendy. I don't even know what number we're up to now. It's in the 300s. I know, it's great. And there's no slacking. We still got guests that, people email us. So if you have someone you'd like us to talk to, just pop us an email with their information. We'll reach out to them. If it's a good fit, we'll have them join us on the show. Today, my guest is one of my favorite people, is Robyn Hood, and we have not talked in a very long time. So, Robyn, I'm so glad to have you back. Thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, nice to see you. It's we've had lots of adventures together, that's for sure.
We have, and I miss them. Like in 2019, we went to Australia and New Zealand together, and that was so much fun. We went to Hobbiton, and I still look at those pictures and they make me smile, and the gardens were so beautiful. And
I know.
We went to restaurants and just had a great time. It was a really great time. So I miss that. And who knows, maybe I can sneak over there when you go to Australia in October and join you. I don't know.
Yeah,
I have to look at my schedule.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly lots of people doing Surefoot in Australia. And when I was there last time, we just integrated into all the things that we do because it's so helpful on so many levels. Yeah. And actually, we talked about doing, what can you do with your horse in the winter? Well, there's a big one, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. So, Robyn, why don't you just give everybody just a little intro, a little background in case they have not heard of you. And then we're going to talk about helping your horses in winter.
Right. Okay. So Linda Tellington Jones is my sister. And so I've been working with Linda actually since I was 9, when I used to go down and when she had a thoroughbred farm, and she would throw me on the young horses because I bounced well, I guess. And no, the horses, we went very quietly. And it's been this is the most amazing part. It has been in 2025, it will be 50 years since Linda first started kind of exploring the whole world of TTouch and developing the method. And I've been lucky enough to kind of work with her, and it's always evolving. And, for me, so we have these components of body work, and that's where sometimes TTouch is, people think it's just about the body work. That's a part of it. When it really started, it started with only mindful groundwork because Linda didn't think that she could actually teach the body work to people, because she started doing this after she'd taken a Feldenkrais course. It's like this very convoluted thing. And so thought, well, if she could change how the posture of horses, the tendency of movement, and so on. And in the first study she did, she took, I think 18 or 20 horses and 8 amateur owners, and they mostly just doing mindful groundwork. So not running the horses around or shaking ropes at them, but more like Tai Chi on the ground. And 18 of the 20 horses within 3 to 6 weeks were completely rideable by amateurs. So it was a huge thing, and it helped her understand that she could make a difference. So that's a long time ago. And
what year was that, Robyn?
What?
Do you know? What year was that?
Well, the book that I think that the book that Ursula Bruns wrote in the Tellington Method was in, I want to say 90, might have even been before that. Might have been.
I think it was before that.
Well, because Equus and Practical Horseman, they put, I don't know if you remember those articles, right? They had major articles of Equus in something that turned into a booklet. And that might have been like in 89, something like that. I'm not really sure. I've got a copy of the book. So that was, and really from there, it was, because it wasn't just about the groundwork, it was also about riding. And Linda has in, I think 77, she introduced riding with a neck ring to Equitana in Germany. And so that was a huge thing, because the Germans thought she was like a little bit crazy because it was so dangerous and, all those things. And so, the work is constantly evolving. And what I always encourage people to do is just be curious. Like, be curious, could I do something in a slightly different way than is my usual way of doing it? And being able to really pay attention to the horse. So that's the thing. Observation has been an over sort of riding part of what we do all the time. Just the giving pause, noting if there's some kind of, I don't even want to say change, but if the horse, how the horse re-engages with you, or do they change their posture and so on. And that's, of course, what we also see with, it's been so helpful with using those observation skills with using the Surefoot pads. Yeah, so it's kind of like life is before COVID. It's just kind of like how you started these things, right? Everything goes before COVID and then after COVID. And if it hadn't been for COVID, I wouldn't have been able to I've gotten all the courses online, which I wanted to do before, but I was never home long enough. I mean, I was away 5 months of the year for 30 years. So it doesn't, make it easy to actually get anything done. And of course, if I didn't have Mandy here to do all the technical stuff, we'd still be where we were. So yeah, and I think that actually it's interesting with the online work, because being able to show videos to people and having to make videos, and then you watch them and you start to be able to see like smaller details that when something's happening in real time, it's harder to see it because it's gone in that second. And what we can always do is go back and look at them, or do things in slow motion and actually see what was going on. So,
Robyn, I can't agree with you more about changing over to video, because when I went back and looked at Shiner's video that we did when I was at your place, and I was picking up his foot so I couldn't see, right?
Yeah.
And then I went back and looked at the video and looked at how he had to throw his entire body over to the opposite side for me to pick up his foot. It wasn't until I saw that I went, oh, now I know why, like what his idea of picking up his foot was, heaving his whole body.
Exactly.
Place, right?
Exactly.
And so that there is that piece of that COVID, did is help us be able to find those observations after the fact.
Yeah. And it so helps you understand, as you say, like, there's such a tendency that people will have about their being, disobedient or naughty or whatever, and when you see what happens, it's actually a miracle what horses do. It's a miracle, really. And, I remember when we were in New Zealand, and one of the horses that just struck me so clearly was a horse that they were using for vaulting. And I worked with the horse doing TTouch, and then I asked you to come in on the next session, and we added some pads to it. And luckily this horse had an amazing guardian who really paid attention to her, because she could have been a horse that was just in so much trouble, because she was so out of balance. They could barely walk her because she was just falling forward so much. And in just a little few sessions of doing pretty simple things, it not only changed how she was to lead, but she was different when they used her for vaulting, which is why they kept coming back to do. They kind of did us a favor because we were looking for a horse, and so, but they found it made a big difference to her. So that was fun.
Yeah. The observation is where it's at. If you can't observe it, it doesn't exist. Right.
Yeah.
And getting people to slow down enough to actually observe, to notice. I think that's the brilliance of Linda's work. And the thing that I love about Surefoot is it slows time down so that those little things can be observed, and then we can understand what's going on, right? It's like this whole other world opens up, and you're like, oh, that's why this is happening.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, and when we talked about me coming back on, figuring out what we would talk about, and probably just before COVID, I think a lot of you watching are familiar with us using body wraps, and we certainly use body wraps to increase proprioception and integrate the horse from front to back and up and down by putting it in either a figure eight or some configuration around the body. And in Australia, and it must have been in 2018, maybe, we had a horse that was really roachy through his back and his, like through the loins, he just had this, big roach. And, we would normally then take a wrap and maybe we would do belly lifts and different things with them and do some work with the tail. And one of the practitioners there said, well, what about if we took the wrap and we went opposite from lifting and we went over the top of the back and we kind of stretched the wrap over the top of the loins? Why not, right? It's that be curious. We couldn't really do any harm. And so we did that. In that case, we had a person on either side and we did this just kind of stretching it down. And the beauty of the wraps is you can't overstretch. And that's one of the advantages of using something like an ACE wrap or a tensor bandage, something versus a TheraBand, versus something that's tighter in the, sort of in the stretch. And held it there for a moment and then slowly released. And his back went from being roached to flattening. I mean, it was amazing. And so, of course, we didn't video it because we didn't really think anything would happen. So from there, and we had explored a little bit things like, horses that were really braced at the base of the neck, of taking a wrap around the neck and from like taking it over the top of the crest and then doing a lift on the base of the neck and slowly releasing. And that had really made a difference, but we hadn't really gone much further with that. And so we started exploring, first of all, doing lifts all over, and I've got a couple of little videos to show you using if you have a horse with a really tight tail, and lots of times they'll be like that, particularly in the winter. And if you put your cold hand underneath, they're not so ideal. And so took a wrap under and then started just doing different things with the wrap. And it was so much easier. And for horses that have a tight tail, it had a great way of releasing it. And it helps people be less pulley and kind of thinking about like strength of things and being more subtle in the movement. And then we started exploring again with this idea of taking the wrap like over the top of the back. And then not only that, but then doing like lifts with the wrap on the legs first, and then all over the body and stretching it over the ribs. And what we started to see was horses taking really deep breaths, and even horses with kissing spine, horses that had had the surgery for kissing spine and were still, struggling with it. It was a really subtle way of kind of moving the tissue. And if people tend to be a little bit not so mindful with how their body work, maybe they're pretty heavy-handed and their horses are pretty sensitive, it made it so much easier to actually teach them. So it's been wonderful.
Well, and it's just fascinating how little, and this is, I know you mentioned there's our other systems, if you will, for trying to get horses to engage using some type of band.
Right.
And my biggest concern, and actually I recently had somebody else reinforce this, is that people use them for way too long a time. Like it should be like no more than 5 minutes. Yeah. And they're trying to make the horse do something versus the whole idea with a wrap is to just tickle the nervous system, if you will, just to bring that attention there so that the horse can then acknowledge and change for himself. And the thing that I find fascinating with Surefoot and the teamwork is how so little makes such a massive difference. Like that gray horse, you didn't see her for very long at all, and yet I don't know where we got into the idea that we have to do these massive, big events, big things, forceful things to get horses to change. We really just, they're just waiting for us to ask, is what I find.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess you just have to, we can only do what we know. I think that's one of the things that is one of the challenges. And I think people tend to do what works for them. And we know that we fall into our habits really easily. And so do animals. I mean, habits aren't bad. They're developed for a reason. They make our life simple. We don't have to think if you have a habit to do something, but we can't change something if we don't change something. And so, it's pretty obvious and not easy to do, actually. So,
yeah.
So why don't I show you a video of using, this is so simple. This is just using the, let's see if I've actually, no, first of all, I have to figure out how I do this. Just a second, because I have to open this here. So this is going to be lifts with wraps on the belly and the hind legs, which a lot of people will have done belly lifts because it could be fantastic for colic. But now let me just see. I just have to see how this is going to work. Let's see. There we go.
Ta-da.
There it is. Okay. Now what I think I'm going to do, there are words on this. We'll just see if this, you can tell me if the sound works okay. Otherwise, I'm just going to turn the sound off and talk.
Okay.
As I want to move back towards, say, the hind legs, if that seems appropriate for you, I'm going to start. Can you hear that okay?
I can. It's a little echoey. If somebody else in the chat wants to just let us know if the sound's okay for them, that's really who's important.
I can start again where the birth area was, like we did in another video. So once again, I just support with my upper hand. I don't really have to do anything. I stretch this wrap, I pause, and I slowly release the stretch. This gives you a really smooth way of doing a belly lift. Of course, we know that you could, in the cases of digestive upset and so on, we can use towels and we can show how we can do that. This is more gentle, and I find it very, very effective. So I'm going to stretch the line, the wrap, and pause, and slowly release it. And I just stand in a way that I could watch his eye as I move back. He's very sensitive in the sheath area. So if you have mares that are sensitive in the udder or geldings sensitive in the sheath, pay a lot of attention. See now as I've gotten a little further back, he's a little bit more concerned. So I'm going to have a little bit less pressure, so less stretch. Good boy. Very good boy. And then slowly release. There we go. And I'm going to try this one more time. So just sliding it back a bit. Just a bit, and then ideally go to a point that does not elicit a response from him in terms of lifting a leg. He wasn't looking to kick me, he was just kind of readjusting himself as I do in my head. Now his eyes closing a little. And I'm going to slowly use the stretch. Now I'm just going to take this one end of the wrap back just a bit. Another little lift. Good boy. Is he listening to me? And slowly releasing the stretch. So now I'm going to take the wrap off. I'm going to do a little bit forward so that we can slide into a hind leg. Good boy. Now, I'd like to do...
Can we talk about that for a minute, Robyn? Can you just pause it there?
Yep.
And just leave... I don't know if you can leave it up.
No, I know. Just a second. I just have to... Whoa, what's going on here? I have to stop it. Let's try here just a second. Okay. There we go.
So I just want to point out a couple things. One, this horse is not on cross ties. And, I think so many people when they're like, it's winter and it's cold and my horse is inside. And so I'm going to put him in the wash rack on cross ties. And I think that, if we want to help our horses in winter, one of the things we can do is not cross tie them.
Agreed. 100%. Absolutely. I mean, it's so, and the only reason that he's tied, because a lot of times if I was in a stall, I would do this with the horse untied if I, as long as it felt safe to do it. But we needed to keep him in place so we could video. That's the actual.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
But you're so right. In fact, it's the same with grooming and everything. I had somebody at a course, I don't know, 25 years ago, asked me if doing TTouch made your horses bite, and I said, well, not generally. What was the situation? So they said, well, we were grooming the horse in the stall, and he turned around to bite me. And I asked where they normally groomed him, and they said, oh, in cross eyes. So I said, well, he doesn't really have a choice of telling you anything in cross eyes. He wasn't trying to bite. He was just indicating that he was not comfortable with it, and he was, pretty polite horse. So anyway, it is interesting. I think that's a good thing to notice. And I think you can really see how, what I actually didn't say in that video is that when I got to that point where you could see him he started to kind of lift his hind legs. And this is a horse that actually has to almost be knocked out to clean a sheath. And he's the only horse we have like that. And so I just did less. So I did less in the lift as I moved back, because it's so important for horses to know that you actually listen to them. And there's an interesting question from Eleanor about explaining about not cross tying. Well, from my perspective, is what I would say, Wendy, is that first of all, most cross ties are set so high that for safety, that a horse can't get their head to a position that they could actually relax, and they can't give you a lot of feedback in terms of being able to kind of turn their head at all. And they can be incredibly dangerous when people leave them in cross ties. Something startles. I know of probably nearly a dozen horses that have flipped over backwards in cross ties.
Yeah. It doesn't give them any possibility of lowering their head and neck, which is what we want them to do when they relax. In other words, if their ears are at wither level or lower, they're lengthening their top line and relaxing their back. But if their head is above, and this horse, you can see where you stopped it right here, he's a little concerned about what you're doing, and his head has come up. Yeah. Right. So a lot of times, if you have to have them on cross ties, I tell people, use the upper ring on the halter. At least you've lowered it by 6 inches.
Exactly. Yeah.
And how many times you've seen little ponies with it hooked up to the bottom ring, and they're standing there, and then we want them to be relaxed in the back. So,
yeah.
Or
full, like I've seen, say, yearling Arabs, and they bring them in because they're prepping them for showing them in hand or whatever. And they're on these cross ties, and they're forced into a posture that is not conducive to allowing any sort of lengthening of the top line. So absolutely. Now there are places in Japan, for instance, at a lot of the stables, it's a rule. They have to have the horses in cross ties. So they've done some interesting adaptations. One is the higher ring, and another is using a form of a kind of taming the tiger that they were allowed to do. So anyway, it's kind of interesting to see. Some of it's just a habit. That's what people do, right? So they don't even question it. So thanks for the question. All right. Yep. Shall I continue with those legs?
Yes.
Okay.
So feeling of where I'm going to go. Now the back should feel a little bit nicer than the tail because there's stretch to it, but I was going to prepare him for that. Now, if you have any questions or concerns about your horses around the hind legs, then just leave this one off your schedule and just do the front legs. So I'm going to pass this around, and I'm always paying attention to what's happening with his ears, his eyes, his breathing. So if you're alone, it might be, you just have to make sure that you can pay that attention. Good boy. So right now there's no stretching of it. I'm just letting it be here so he can just notice the feeling. Which way? So I'm going to just have that little connection and do a tiny little stretch of the back. And pause. Good. And I'm going to slowly release the stretch. That's a good one.
He's a very expressive horse.
Such a great video. Yeah. And what's interesting, that's really important, is that you put the wrap there and you waited, and you could see him go through a whole process of just having the contact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He's an extremely polite horse. You can see that.
Yeah. But there's so much, you look at his ears, his eyes, yeah, his mouth.
Oh, yeah.
There's and you can almost see this like this little bit of conflict between his habit of wanting to react and then the fact that you're going slowly gives him the time to find something else, to find the relaxation in it.
Yeah.
So Robyn, do you think that the wraps are affecting, well, how are they working? How does this work?
Good question, isn't it? You know, I talked to Ricky Schultz, a vet in Denmark who worked on the book on fascia. She's been doing TTouch for a long time. I've known her for, I don't know, since '89. And she, stop this. She really believes that the wraps are really affecting the fascia. So what we started talking about with I'm going to show you another video, but that it's like fascial integration is actually what's happening, because it's so subtle, and there's a little tiny, you know, the fascial lines run basically everywhere. And so all the things we do, whether it's putting a wrap on them or moving the leg with it. So Ellen asked, that one was an ACE bandage. And all ACE actually stands for is all cotton elastic, which is kind of interesting. It's just that you can use lots of different things. You could use leg wraps if that's what you happen to have. The stretch is going to be a little different. So you just actually have to pay attention to that. It's not that it's a really big deal.
And it doesn't slide over the hair, I think, is one of the things that's important is, you know, if you're using a plastic-like material, you have to put more tension in to keep it from moving.
Absolutely. And so it's, I think it's about what I would say the wraps too. It's about giving feedback to the body. Any light contact on either side of a joint or any sort of slight movement of the tissue helps to activate proprioception. And I think that with the wraps, when we then take it into movement, it helps the horses really have a better sense of themselves and a better sense of integration, you know, where they are in space. But it's just giving them that feedback about letting them know. And even on humans, it can be so light. In fact, the lighter it is in the long run, the more you feel. Like, it's not about falling off light, but if it's tight, it affects more the muscles. And we're much more interested in affecting the nervous system and really giving the body a new experience.
Yeah, you know, the more I've been learning about fascia, the more I've been thinking that everything that the TTouch does, whether it's the body wraps or the touches, is that it's talking to the fascia, and the fascia is the oldest nervous system. Exactly.
Right? Yeah. And I remember when I had I remember years ago, I did something for the Holistic Vet Association, and there was somebody who was doing a talk about, well, connective tissue, which fascia is also connective tissue. I mean, it's a little bit there's a lot of crossover, I think. But in the old sort of Chinese literature, connective tissue goes to every part of the body, and it moves information actually faster than meridians. And that's one of the things that Ricky Schultz said. She wrote an article, I think, in 2012 about how she felt that what TTouch was doing a huge part was that it was affecting the connective tissue in a really positive way because it wasn't invasive. So it was, it's interesting. She's always been interested in this. Now I have a video of doing this on the neck. I have no idea what his response would be. This was the first time he'd ever experienced it. And when you watch this video, I'm not sure exactly what is creating the huge response that you're going to see that he gets as we get closer to the pole. I'm not sure which part of it is, and you'll see why when I show you this. Just a second. I'm just going to take this back to the beginning, and let's try that.
There are different ways of using wraps besides around the body to increase awareness and to give a sense of where they are in space. And one of the ways is to do some lifts with these wraps. So you can do anything from anywhere along the neck and the legs, and of course, we already showed you how to do some belly lifts. So if you have a horse that is really tight on the base of the neck, I found that if I hold one hand over the top of the neck, with the other hand, I just do this little, I stretch the wrap, I pause, and I slowly release that stretch. And I can wrap a little bit, and I can repeat the exercise. This can be a way of helping them release through that base of the neck. I can also do this a little bit higher on the neck if they're tight in the poll. I might find that if I gently took the wrap over the top, so he doesn't get this so good, and just roll this back and forth slightly. That may also give a little bit of release in the poll. And if you have horses that are sensitive about being touched in this area, you don't have to have your hands there, you can use the wrap. As I was doing the little stretch on the top of the pole, you could see he started this release, and it was really that long tongue going out, huge yawns, stretching his neck. And it was interesting because it's a little bit hard to know if it was the lifts on the neck or the part of the top of the pole. My sense is that it was probably more to do with the pole than anything else. So it was really interesting to see how long it actually carried on. And so we just let him have that time to actually process the experience.
This is super fascinating.
Isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
It's
like, and it was interesting because when you first put the wrap on, he took a step back and you could see he was like, oh no. And what did you do? Not even 30 seconds, right?
No. Yeah, not even 30 seconds. And we just we kept thinking he was going to stop doing this, like it was going to, and
yeah.
We just sort of let the camera run a little bit so we could see what he did. But it was just
entire neck.
I know. And so I was thinking, those are things like, in the winter, for instance, if it's wet or cold or whatever, they may not really even want you to put your hands, or maybe they've got their static electricity, like a lot of horses get super staticky. And so when we can do something that might be a little different, it could be, it just could be interesting. I've just found that it's been fascinating to see how many horses respond to it. So, and it's really simple. But I'm going to show you the tail one, and then I'm going to just show you one with another thing you can do with the wraps. The tail was also really fascinating because there's lots of horses who are tight in the tail, and if you start, stop. Right, so come on, stop this. Okay, let's go back here, and.
Yeah, and you don't have to groom your horse. It doesn't matter if your ace bandages get dirty.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I want to do both sides of the book.
Okay, just a second. I'll start this. And of course, you will have wanted to make sure your horse is okay with the tail. Most people will have done some of the tail TTouch first, but maybe your horse is sensitive.
And I could do the tail. So I would suggest that you probably have done some of the TTouch tail work before you do this. Make sure that they're okay. So I could just simply start by stroking the hair on the tail to make sure that there may be a little bit of a lift with his tail as I do that. Or I could do a few touches along the tailbone. Now, some horses are sensitive about having a tail wrap. You might find that taking this wrap, and I'm not going to take it as high as a tail wrap would be so that I could slide it down and out if I needed to. But I found that sometimes just doing this little lift with the wrap, moving the tail, it's a little different than when we use our hands. And I could roll the tail by taking the wrap with sort of a lifting motion. And a little pause. So this could be very helpful for horses that are a little bit sensitive around the tail area. He's not particularly tight in the tail, but if they were, I might start a little bit lower on the tailbone. And I'm just using my body to create this little rolling motion. And I might even just do sort of connect my hands on the wrap and do a little stretch of the tail. It's really not, I'm not having contact on the bone, pause, and slowly release.
You know, the beauty of this is two things. One, it's not your hand.
Exactly.
So a lot of horses react to it. But two, a horse's tail is really powerful. So if they don't want it, they can just go through that ace bandage and put their tail wherever they want it.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, really in the wintertime, often if your hand is a little, I mean, it's really cold depending on where you live, and that will tend to get them to clamp the tail.
Right. And so this kind of just gets around those two things so quickly.
Yeah, totally.
Being off to the side so that you can always see your horse's eyes, so they can see you, and that they can turn their head in both directions so that they can really see you and be a participant rather than simply having it done to them.
And of course, that's one of the other reasons that, I mean, he's tied long enough that he can turn his head, not all the way around, but he can at least turn his head so that they get a chance to almost like be more of a participant. And because I've seen horses that have had things done to their tail, and if they're used to being in cross ties, they just don't engage with you. And I kind of want them to really feel it and give me that feedback about, oh, you know, it's interesting. Plus, it gives you a sense of, can they turn their head in both directions? Because I see that really change sometimes with a horse. If I start to do some of the tail touch with them, you know, they may always have a habit of turning in one direction, and that'll often start to change that they're able to move their head more freely.
Well, I think what people don't realize is that the tail has about 16 vertebrae. It's still part of the spine. So you're affecting the horse all the way through the spine, and it's such a good indicator of things going on in the spine too. And so the fact that if the horse starts to move his head, you're moving the other end of the spine is moving, right?
Yeah.
And so you're getting an influence through the entire spine.
And it's interesting as we, you know, we do lots of little small movements through the vertebrae. And it's interesting because I've heard the number 18 to 21 vertebrae. So it's interesting, 16 that you've heard. I don't know. I'm sure it probably varies. I'm sure it varies. And is that, and as you're like doing these little flexes with the tail, we see different parts of the back move. And what I've heard from osteopaths is that each part of the tail is kind of reflected in that part of the back. So the top of the tailbone would be more like in the wither area. And as you move down the tail, it's in different parts. Now, what I've noticed as I start to do this little, you know, purling, the gentle purling that we do sometimes, is that that you'll see a little bit of movement go down the back. So I don't really know. I just, you know, that's what I've been told. And, you know, what we do is we do what we do. And then so often people will say, oh, do you know you're affecting that? And we'll go, great. But, you know, that we did it because it worked and it seemed to be effective. But, you know, and that's good. I think you know, I
think that the science is slow to catch up with activity. And, you know, like if it, we were breathing all the time, we had to discover that it was oxygen that we were using, right? So it wasn't
right. Yeah, right. Yeah, we managed to do that
because I get that, you know, all the time with Surefoot is people ask me, is there any research? And the good news is actually now we're getting research. We have 2 clear research papers that have come out. There's more being done, and so the research is coming out. But the thing is, the Surefoot's been working for, you know, ever many years, just like oxygen without the research, but it's really nice to get the data. And it's nice. It's a nice piece of information to know that different vertebrae affect different parts of the spine. It's just, you know, it just adds another layer of interest.
Yeah. And maybe also why it works. I know that, you know, there's been times when I've had remember the first time I did this, I can't remember where I was, but there were these two guys at the barn, and they're like, well, how does that tail work actually affect the back? And I said, well, it was their horse. I said, well, you ride your horse bareback? I said, hop on and I'll let you feel it. And it was fascinating because then they really got it, because they could feel all the movement through the spine as I was doing that, just circling the tail and then doing just a little glide on the tail. And then that little kind of push in. And it was interesting. They were just like, wow, we kind of never would have guessed. And I really like to do I like to do the forelock, and I like to do the tail with horses when there's a rider on them. Generally it's with a saddle, because I think it helps horses organize their nervous system weight bearing, as opposed to, so that as opposed to, it's the same as with the Surefoots, like putting a rider on. I find that that's where I see often people will see the most influence or change in horses, when they can actually feel it on their back. Wouldn't you say, Wendy?
I couldn't agree more. And I think it goes back to quantum physics. Okay. And quantum physics talks about the observer being as important in the experiment as the experiment itself. And when the person is on their horse and they feel a tail touch or a forelock slide, when they feel, because we've kind of realized from COVID that without video to go back and analyze the small details, we miss a lot. Right. And I think that when you're actually sitting on the horse, and I purposely do Surefoot with people for this, the perspective of the person is completely changed, because now they are part of the observation of the experiment. Yeah. They are the observer in the experiment. And the minute they observe, it exists. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the basis of quantum physics. Yeah.
And I think that, I think anything that we can do for the horse that actually allows them to organize themselves weight bearing, because I think lots of body work is done on horses. Lots of times it's taken into not very mindful movement, which I think kind of limits a little bit the effectiveness of body work, because of the postural changes. But then you take the posture into weight bearing, because I think that's a huge piece and that's why when we start our young horses, we take them through all these steps of every time we change the equipment. If we put a body wrap on, it changes the context of the exercise. If we put a surf single, or we put a saddle or whatever, so we'll kind of go back through the some of the elements that we went through, some of the labyrinth and so on and so forth, so they can learn how to organize themselves wearing different equipment and in different experiences. Same thing happens as soon as we put a rider on. It's hugely dramatic.
It's huge. It's so huge. And you're influencing both nervous systems, right? The horse and the rider. So they integrate together. And I couldn't agree with you more. I just, anytime I get the opportunity to be able to do Surefoot with a rider on, I have some people that, like, she was a serious fox hunter, and she came and brought this horse, and, you're like, okay, I don't know how much this person's going to change. I know I can change this horse. Mm-hmm. And when she came back the next time, she was completely blown away by what Surefoot could do, and brought me a really difficult horse that she couldn't do with the horse on the ground. Wow. And so I was like, fine, let's just have the rider on board. And I had her on. She hadn't thought about that. And the horse completely changed. Yeah. And it was just, she was blown away. And it's like, I couldn't agree with you more. There's something about that unified experience of the two nervous systems together with whatever it is that we're doing that influences that, is the guide. We're kind of like the guides.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I was thinking, it's interesting. So interesting that they're doing research. Like, one of the things that we've always had a challenge with we've had people that wanted to do research with different kinds of, different things to do with TTouch. And there's been a little bit of stuff done. It's I would say most of the research that's been done on animals, certainly with dogs, has actually been done on rats or mice. And they've extrapolated that information from a laboratory situation into real life. And I don't know, I think it's difficult for many, many reasons. I mean, first of all, a mouse is not a dog, and dogs live in social situations most of the time, and they have emotional connections with people, and so so I think it can be challenging to find the parameters to make it considered, good science, if you will, because there's it's so different. I mean, I don't think you can really put it into the same kind of statistics when you're working with it. You can observe the changes, but what kind of research are they doing?
So I spent an hour with Bob Bowker and Hillary Clayton at lunch one time trying to come up with an elegant study, and we couldn't. Okay. Yeah. And I spent a couple hours with Stephen Adair, DVM at UT Tennessee. And then, time passes and things change and the technology changes. Mm. And so there's a person, Lauren Wayne, over at in the UK, and she was looking at protraction, retraction of the limb and top line. And she took 6 horses, and they had them in a specific environment. I have a whole webinar on it.
Right. Cool. Oh yeah, I have to go back and look at it.
But they took the horses into a specific environment away from their normal routine. Right. And then the thing that she noticed, not only did the top line improve over the time, that's all they did with surefoot pads. These horses were in a riding program. The students commented on the changes in the horses. But more importantly, and this I think is if we're going to get this to where people really, it matters.
Right. Yeah.
It was it's the welfare piece. And these horses started out being like, I don't know where I'm going to this space, to dragging everybody into the place where they were going to stand on surefoot pads.
Nice. Yeah.
So while she hadn't studied the ethology, the ethogram, right. She wants to continue her research. And I'm actually going to be working with another veterinarian, and we're talking about how we can do an ethogram, because, the work that Dr. Sue Dyson is doing is very important. And she's telling people that this is what a horse looks like in pain. But in my opinion, there's not enough about what does a horse look like when they're not in pain. Right. So that we have the contrast. And so this is where, using surefoot, I think the next study that Lauren might do is adding the ethology and videoing. We're talking about videoing the horse's face and just showing the change in the horse's face from a control group.
Yeah, that's a good idea, because it is challenging to find something that that's so measurable, which is great. I mean, we had one of our practitioners, when she was in vet school, she did a trailering research, she got it approved to do for her behavior part of her course. And they took 20 horses to find 10 horses that were slow loaders. So they had, like a neutral person load them, and they had to have taken more than, 15 minutes or something like that to load it to be considered difficult. So anyway, they took the 10 horses and they did 6 sessions, and she did 6 sessions with them. She did a couple with some body work, 30 to 45 minutes. She did a riding session with them. She did a bit of groundwork, nothing to do with the trailer, actually, like completely excluding it. She took cortisol levels, which at the time, because this is some years ago, they didn't really have a baseline for cortisol for horses. And she took pulse and respiration and so on. And what she noticed was that the horses that were, difficult loaders, that when many of them, when they saw the horse trailer, is when their pulse and respiration went up, like immediately went up. And the horses that when they got in, that they stood perfectly still, like a statue, had a higher pulse and respiration than the horses that got in and could just move enough to organize themselves, not like scrambling, but just being able to move. And then when they did the test, 9 out of 10 of the horses loaded in a considerably quicker period of time. The 10th horse, she was not able to repeat the exercise. So it was a 0 kind of thing, a neutral. But they all loaded quicker, and they had lower pulse and respiration and so on. So she actually won an award for it, which is pretty cool. I think it's really important because, we've all seen these horses that, my horse is just stubborn. He won't go in. I mean, we know it's a miracle that horses go in anyway.
Yeah.
If you've ever ridden in a trailer, it's like a miracle. So I have one more thing that I'm going to show you. And this is, so I mentioned that, we took it over the top of the neck, and you can do this literally anywhere. We've also found, like, you take it across the forehead. Actually, I'm going to show you on my little Minty horse here, who's my helper horse when I can't go outside. You can take the wrap, for instance, and just even take it across the forehead and just do these really gentle little stretches. Of course, we can take it across the top of the head. You could take it under the jowl. And what I do is I put my fingers under the wrap. I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah.
And I jiggle my fingers underneath. And this creates a little, like the jellyfish jiggle, one of the movements that we do. And it's because vibrational contact is also something that helps to activate proprioception. And you can also, of course, go around the legs and so on. We did some horses that we actually went around the hindquarters, and we just gently stretched it down over the top of the back. So you can do this by yourself, and then slowly release. So then we started to do things like just taking it across the ribs, and then just literally stretching and pausing and slowly releasing. Now, at first I thought, what's that going to do? When you do it on a human, you can really feel it. Again, it's so subtle that it is like kind of tickling or whispering to the nervous system to get their attention in a different way. You can also, to do like a python lift, for those of you who know TTouch, if I stabilize the wrap at the base of the wrap with my left hand, and I just stretch my right hand up a bit, I pause, and I slowly release that. That is, again, you'll think you're doing nothing. Then I started this, actually letting humans feel this, is taking the wrap, stretching it, and then actually moving the tissue in a circle and a quarter by moving my body. So it's like doing a touch on the body without your hand. And it was, it's amazing how much you feel because it's so subtle. So that was pretty fun. So this was
and Kathy just said it would be interesting to do heart rate variability, and there is new equipment now that's much more accurate. In 2019, even HVR was not really up to speed, but now it's much
cool.
better.
It would be extremely interesting to sort of experiment with some of that and see what it's doing. So this is this seems to work. This was early on. Rebecca Booth is one of our instructors in Australia, and she works a lot with racehorses. Like her job is working with performance horses and racehorses. And so she's just taking the wrap over the top of the back and stretching it. And it is not like a hard stretch, because you can't get a hard stretch with this. And then pausing it and then slowly releasing it.
I think that's what's so cool about the ACE bandages. There's, you know.
Yeah. They're not tight. They're not a tight stretch. And I think that is, but they're also not soggy. Like for us, I think it's a really good balance.
Yep.
He's, you can see this, there's the food trolleys coming. So that's quite interesting, but she's used this with a number of horses that have had kissing spine. And I have an amazing longer video that she did, 20 minutes with a 4-year-old racing colt. So he's in racing fit, and he's considered quite a handful to work with. And she does this 20-minute session with him using lifts with the wraps and doing this. And he, without a halter on, just completely free in the stall. And it's
Well,
really nice to see.
It is so interesting to watch his conflict between food and what she's doing, right? He's like, the food truck's coming. Oh, but this is really interesting. But the food truck's coming. But this is really interesting.
Yeah, right.
Wow. You know, it's so fascinating to see what wins.
I know. It's nice, isn't it? It's
really nice. And you could just see him going through that process of wait a second.
Now this was when we were kind of first really like starting to see how it was working on the horses she was working with. And at this time in I think it was in their winter where they had a lot of mud. And so a lot of the horses were coming in tight through the ribs, and maybe they'd slipped or whatever. And she said that made a huge difference. And you can see that this horse is like interested in what she's doing. And,
you know, I think people, until you have broken a rib, you do not appreciate your ribs.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and just what they're doing and how much it's, you know, I remember Mia, when I was working with Mia, how much she would spend time on the rib cage.
Oh yeah.
You know, and you're like, what's going on? But I mean, it's where it's at, right? I mean, it's the place we have the least awareness of it. It's so important. Oh yeah. You just thought that was awesome.
Feel them like taking a deeper breath into your hand. And it's just so fascinating to me how subtle they're not really comfortable with what they're doing. It gives them another way of making contact. So that there is not so easy for the horse. You can see that.
Right? That all you have to do is move away from it.
Right, exactly. And that's like, I think that's such an important part about everything that we do. And the more things that we can to give us some feedback about what they're doing, I think it's incredibly important.
Kind of recap the 3 things they could do to help their horses through winter. They would be,
well, I would say get some kind of an elastic bandage. You know, maybe if you had or you could use a leg wrap. You just have to be careful about the stretch and go out and really play with this. And the thing is, you know, horses often, you know, I often do python lifts and so on the horse's legs in all parts of it before you start. Just notice, and you may find that one part of one leg is colder than the other. I have a video as I was doing python lifts on, and what I noticed was the front of his left was sort of a more normal temperature. And so it was interesting. So pay attention to what your horse's response is. You might take 10 minutes and do that and see what it is. And I think that you'll learn a lot about your horse, but I think most of all, you could give them a really nice experience about contact, which I think not every horse is comfortable. I think grooming can be an issue, especially if you have a horse that's sensitive about being or ideally, I mean, that's where if you have a horse that's in a box. I mean, the thing is, if you have a horse on box rest, you could do so much of this, because just increasing the circulation is, you know, it helps you.
Thank you so much for joining me. How can people find out more about TTouch?
If you go to TTouch.com, or actually TTouch.ca is our website, and they're redoing TTouch.ca is our learn profile or learn platform. But we have some free videos there, that like some free little mini courses that people can click on and sign up if they want to learn a little bit more about the, you know, applying he said about the heart rate. That would be
a study using HBR with what she's doing with a scientist at a university. So she taught it's coming down the pike. And I think that maybe how we can put some data behind what we know is going on.
Yeah. I mean, it is so cool. I mean, I love that people do research with it. You know, I'm not that smart to do something like that. I just do what I do and see what happens. And that's
No, and you know what you need, so that it's credible, right?
Yeah,
I mean, and that's the thing. So that's why, you know, I'm just excited that people are starting to do that kind of stuff.
Well, you know, actually, one thing I just want to mention, Wendy, too, is I think the research is so clear with the Surefoot, with the pad, like being able to take X-rays of the foot when they're on a pad. Like when you were, you know, they're saying that because you can really see what's happening with the angles rather than just on a block, an movable block. So
yeah, because it's going to show you how the horse actually is in real life in footing that's going to give, and most footing is going to give. Most horses.
Let's hope so.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.